Hey guys, tonight we drift back in time, not to some grand empire or blood-soaked battlefield, but to a silvery crescent of moonlit shore somewhere along the coast of Aotearoa, New Zealand. You're barefoot on the damp sand, the cold lapping at your ankles. You hear the hush of the tide drawing back, like a giant slow breath. In the darkness, a shape crouches beside you, weaving a cord from flax. The air smells like salt and seaweed. A woven kiri basket rests nearby, filled with tools that don't look like much. Shells, bones, a dull knife, a curl of dried shark skin. You've just stepped into a world where food comes not from markets, but from the tide and your hands. Tonight, you'll learn what it means to fish like the Maori. Just a warning, you probably won't survive this. Not because of the fishing, but because you'll be paddling a handmade canoe 20 kilometers offshore before sunrise. You do not have life insurance. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the time where you're listening from. I love seeing where in the world you're tuning in. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trail after the old fisher as he moves with almost no sound, his feet finding ancient footpaths without thought. The forest edge is behind you now. The trees hush one last whisper as you break into the open, the sea stretching ahead. You see the silhouettes of waka, pulled up beyond the tide line, their hulls slick with spray. There's no clatter of gear, no bright plastic tackle boxes, just flax ropes, woven nets, and one thing that catches your eye, a simple hook tied to a line. It looks wrong, not deadly. It's carved from piu, wua shell, shimmering with mother of pearl, but there's no barb. It curves in on itself like a question mark. You dismiss it as broken if it weren't for how reverently the man handles it. This, you're told, is matau. It's more than a tool. It's an inheritance. A companion. Some are used until they break. Others are never used at all, carried for mana, status, or sacred reasons. Some are buried with their owners. Others passed on for generations. They've been pulled from graves, cave floors, and even ancient middens. Refuse heaps turn to time capsules. And they all seem so simple. But don't let the simplicity fool you. This hook isn't primitive. It's a masterclass in low-tech precision. You'll learn soon enough that less is very much more out here. In fact, the less this hook does, the more the fish do. You'll see. As the first stars begin to fade, you're handed a flax cord, thick and strong. You notice how it's been twisted with varying tension. A technique that stops it from tangling and lets it resist water rot. You feel a bit smug until you try to tie a knot with it and fail miserably. The man chuckles. He doesn't speak much English, but the look says it all rookie. You follow him to a small canoe, the waka tawai, carved from a single tree. It rocks gently in the shallows. There's a notch carved into the hull to hold your line. And that's it. No rod, no reel, just you, the hook, and the line. You're starting to feel like maybe you really aren't surviving this. As you paddle out, the shore recedes. Morning mist hugs the horizon like a sleeping cat. Gulls wheel overhead, and you swear one just cackled at you. Beneath you, the sea deepens. You glance overboard and see nothing but ink, but the old fisher nods. This is the place. You lower your line. The hook sinks silently. No bait, just that shining shell and the hypnotic curl of the curve. You wait and wait, then tug. Another. You haul it in. A gleaming trevilly writhe is on the line, pierced perfectly in the jaw. How? Historians still argue whether this design evolved through trial and error, or whether some long-forgotten genius figured it out all at once. The design seems to predate barbed hooks, and yet somehow works better in the conditions here. The inward, pointing tip doesn't pierce on the first bite. It catches in the mouth corner on the second. The fish essentially hook themselves. You're not fishing. You're just waiting for physics to do its thing. Fringe theorists once suggested the Maori might have received fishing technology from visiting Polynesian mariners or even ancient South Americans. But here's the catch. Variations of this same hook have been found all across the Pacific, from Hawaii to the Marquesas, and the DNA of Maori design is unmistakable. As the canoe rocks gently, you lean over the edge and watch silver streaks dart below. The simplicity of the hook now feels less like navide and more like secret knowledge. Something you weren't supposed to understand until you held it. Another tug, another fish. You're starting to get it, almost. You sit back in the canoe, squinting at the strange, barbless object in your hand. The water still sways gently beneath you, but your mind's swaying harder. How does something this simple work so reliably? You've fished before, maybe with your grandpa's rusty lures or a gas station rod that came with everything but actual luck. Those setups had triple hooks, spinning blades, maybe even glow in the dark paint. This Maori hook, it's a curved shard of shell tied to a string. You peer closer. No metal, no knot of clever mechanism. Just a curve, smooth and inward, pointing like it's whispering to the fish, "Come closer, trust me." And yet it works. Better than it has any right to. Historians call it the Oan, peace wonder. Most matau were carved from a single material, piwa shell, moa bone, or even tough hardwoods like mare. There's something almost defiant about it. In an age when other ancient societies were inventing more complex fishing tackle, the Maori perfected less. Not less effort. These were master carvers and fishers, but less clutter, less complication, more trust in nature and in the fish themselves. You turn the hook over in your hand and trace its arc with your finger. There's no point sharp enough to cut you, but you wouldn't bet on the fish getting away. That inward turn isn't a design flaw, it's a feature. When the fish tries to escape, it drives the hook deeper into the soft corner of its mouth. And once it's there, it doesn't wiggle loose, it holds silently, like it was meant to. The Maori didn't draw this shape on a chalkboard first. No graphs, no prototypes. They watched the sea. They studied how fish moved, fed, fled. They noticed things we've forgotten, like how fish inhale food from a certain angle, or how they twist their bodies in just the right way to make an inward hook do its magic. There's an old story, maybe more truth than myth, about a tahunga, or priest expert, who could tell what kind of hook to use just by tasting the salt on the wind. His hooks always came back with fish. Some say it was divine insight, others, a lifetime of observation. Historians still argue whether these hooks emerged independently in Aotearoa or came with Polynesian explorers who settled the islands. It's one of those delicious debates with no clear answer because the evidence flows both ways. The materials evolved with the land. No coral here, but plenty of tough hardwoods. And the fish, whole new species to adapt to. That hook became a passport into New Zealand's marine world. You glance again at the old man beside you. He's humming softly. Not a tune you recognize, more like the tide singing in syllables. His fingers move on another hook, tying a lashing with fibers from muka flax. He's not in a hurry. He doesn't need to be. This hook will still be catching fish long after your fancy modern gear rusts away. You lean over the side of the canoe and watch your reflection ripple in the water. Then, something else. Movement. Another flash of silver. You lower your line again. There's an eerie beauty in how the hook sinks. It doesn't stab. It glides. Like a falling feather, like it belongs there. And maybe it does. The fish thinks so. Another bite. This time the hook catches fast, perfectly. Not through brute force, but by some invisible handshake between curve and jaw. It makes you wonder, how many other things have we made more complicated just because we could? One quirky tidbit. Some matau were found to have tiny teeth, not barbs, but minute serrations along the inside of the hook's shank. They weren't even sharp. Theories range from grip enhancement to spiritual signature. One 19th century collector insisted these teeth were laughing mouths, carved to amuse the sea gods. You're not sure if that's poetic or just suspiciously Victorian. You turn your attention back to the sea. The fish aren't biting right now, and that's okay. There's a rhythm to all this. You feel it in your spine, in the sway of the boat, in the tug of the line. You start to understand that fishing, for the Maori, wasn't just about catching. It was about listening to the fish to the hook. Imagine spending your life perfecting one shape. Not 10, not 50. Just one, over generations. Tweaking it slightly, making it smaller or broader or more finely curved, depending on what you learned from the ocean that week. Your design meeting wasn't held in a boardroom. It happened while cleaning your net or dreaming during a storm. And then there's the odd truth. Even now, with all our technology, scientists can't improve on these hooks in Maori waters. They've tried. Modern fishing gear still struggles to outperform these ancient curves when it comes to certain species like snapper or kahawai. It's like nature signed off on this blueprint and said, this one's good forever. You dangle your hand over the edge again. No fish right now, just peace. You imagine how many hours, days, lifetimes have been spent staring into this same water, hook in hand. The line connects you, not just to fish, but to centuries of practice. Patience, craft, faith. You smile, it's a hook, but really it's a story. The canoe drifts, slow and sure, on the breath of the sea. Your hands rest on your knees now, the line coiled loosely between your fingers. It's gone slack, not from failure, but from understanding. You're not just watching the water anymore, you're part of it, like kelp or current. And you start to feel it. The shape of this hook isn't just practical, it's spiritual. The Maori didn't separate craft from cosmology. Everything was connected. Wakapapa, the deep genealogical web linking people, animals, gods, and even tools. That little shell hook in your hand, it wasn't just a hook. It was a descendant, a child of Tangaroa, god of the sea, and maybe even a whisper from Emi-Ui, the demigod who fished up the North Island with a magical jawbone hook. No pressure or anything. You glance again at your own matau, and now it seems different, like it's alive. Each curve seems deliberate, not just efficient, but communicative. The inward bend almost resembles a question mark or a beckoning finger. Some hooks had engraved markings, not just decorative, but sacred. Spirals, notches, grooves worn smooth by time. Every detail was a conversation. With the sea, the ancestors, maybe even the fish themselves. The materials mattered. Paua shell was prized, not just for its shimmering blues and greens, but because it carried a glint of the divine. Bone, especially human or moa bone, came with a weightier legacy. You didn't carve a hook from someone's ancestor lightly. That's not just a tool, that's Grandpa Joff, repurposed for dinner. And yet it happened, especially in times of need or in reverence. Some lines were plated not just for strength, but in repeating numerical patterns. 4s, 7s, 9s, each with symbolic meaning. Fishing was never just about food. It was also about relationship, reciprocity. You took from the sea only what you needed, and in return, you honored it with careful ritual. Often, the first fish of the day was returned to the water as a gift to Tangaroa. Try pitching that idea on a commercial trawler. Even the act of making the hook was sacred. Some carvers would fast before shaping a particularly important matau. Others worked only at night, under certain moon phases believed to strengthen the hook's Maori, or life force. Imagine telling your local fishing shop that you only want tackle blessed under a waxing crescent. Watch them slowly edge away from you. Historians still debate whether these rituals were purely spiritual or also subtly scientific. Was fasting a form of mental focus? Were moon phases correlated with fish behavior? You could argue either way, but the Maori didn't separate science from spirit. For them, both were just different names for the same truths. You touch the hook again and try to picture the hands that shaped it. Young, old, covered in scars or smooth with age. Someone sat, not unlike you, and whittled this form from a sliver of shell, knowing it had to be just right. Not perfect, just true. The shank needed the right thickness, the bend, the right tension. Even the lashing, the way line met hook, was tailored not only for strength but for harmony. A poor lashing could offend Tangaroa, or just lose your dinner. Both were tragic, and it wasn't always a man's task. Women, too, played roles in crafting, maintaining, and blessing the gear. There's one quirky tale about a tohunga who refused to fish with any hook lashed by a man. He claimed only the fingers of women could tie the knot soft enough to fool the fish. Is it true? Maybe. Or maybe it was just his way of getting out of work. The hook you now cradle is silent. But it's not still. It hums, somehow with potential. It's one piece of a larger ritual where every action is mindful. The paddle stroke, the first line cast, even the silence between bites. Everything carries intention. You lean forward as a light gust ripples across the water. The sun is higher now, but not hot. Just a mellow warmth on your shoulders. Beside you, the old fisherman ties a new hook, his hands moving slow, but precise. He finishes and passes it to you, nodding. This one is different. It's made from wood, polished, almost oily to the touch, with a slight groove etched into the inside curve. No shimmer like the shell, but solid. You feel its weight and wonder if maybe this one's not for fishing at all. Some matawa were made to be worn, amulets of protection or status. Chiefs and tohunga might wear them like medals, reminders of their lineage or mastery of the sea. Still, you tie it on. The line loops through a carved hole in the head of the hook. A notch holds it firm. You lower it gently, the curve catching sunlight as it descends. A flash, then tension. You pull. This time, the fish is bigger, fighting harder, bending the line into a trembling bow. But the hook holds. It turns inward. It grips, not violently, just efficiently. Like it's doing what it was always meant to do. As the fish breaks the surface in a spray of silver, the old man laughs softly. Not a mocking laugh, a proud one. You've become, in some small way, part of the story. A story carved into shell, whispered into bone, wrapped in flax, and flung into the blue forever. The fish flaps against the bottom of the canoe, its silver sides glistening under the morning light. You sit there, heart thumping a little too fast for such a quiet moment, as if the success of that one catch has rewired something in your brain. You didn't just pull a fish from the sea, you used a centuries old piece of technology so deceptively simple it would be laughed off a modern fishing boat. You look again at that curve. It's hypnotic. Too gentle to intimidate, too minimal to impress in a trophy case. But now that you've seen it work, you understand why Maori fishers didn't tinker with the design for hundreds of years. Why fix what isn't broken? Still, that hasn't stopped historians from asking the question, was this all deliberate design? Or just beautiful, lucky intuition? Historians still argue whether Maori engineers meant to make something this effective, or whether it was simply the product of copying what worked, refining slightly, and handing that knowledge down generation after generation. In other words, was this the result of scientific process or ancestral muscle memory? You think of modern engineers hunched over CAD software, running simulations. The Maori had no such tools, but they had centuries of pattern recognition. They noticed when one hook consistently landed more snapper than another. They passed down stories about it. They carved new hooks that looked more like the successful ones. Eventually, they ended up with a curve so optimal it feels less like human invention and more like something the sea dreamed up. Still, some scholars argue that the inward, pointing hook couldn't possibly have been consciously optimized. There are no written records, no technical manuals, no mathematical formulas from that era. Just tools and their traces. And yet, what if that was the point? Some say Maori craftsmanship was less about theory and more about relationship. The hook wasn't designed in isolation. It was born from interaction with the ocean, the fish, the people. It didn't need diagrams. It needed to feel right. Take the angle of the bend. Too shallow, and the fish slips away. Too tight, and it can't catch the jaw. Somehow they found the golden angle. Again and again. That's not luck. That's attention. You start to notice the tiny variations between hooks. One curves slightly more. Another has a flatter back. One is thicker at the shank. Each choice has consequences. The larger ones catch deep sea fish. The smaller, delicate ones are for inshore hauls. And then there are those inexplicable little features. Grooves carved near the eye, nicks along the inside bend. Are they aesthetic? Functional? Ritual? No one agrees. One quirky theory comes from an early 20th century ethnographer who claimed the Maori sometimes carved hooks to mimic the shape of local shellfish. His notes suggest that some fish recognize the likeness and bit more willingly. That's either brilliant or bonkers, depending on your faith in fish intelligence. Another suggests that the hooks weren't just about catching fish. They were about choosing fish. Hooks could be optimized for size, species, or even age. Maori fishers weren't interested in overfishing. They aimed for balance. A smaller hook for small meals. A ceremonial hook for rare occasions. The wrong hook in the wrong season. A sign of disrespect to the sea, and bad luck besides. As you trail your fingers in the water, you remember something the old man said earlier. Or maybe didn't say. More like a feeling he gave off. You don't command the ocean. You ask it. That humility is built into the design. A barbed hook forces. The Maori hook invites. This philosophy extended to other tools, too. Maori carving, architecture, and even weaponry often followed this path of refined simplicity. Less flash, more function, but always embedded with meaning. It's tempting to call the Maori hook a minimalist design, but that word feels too trendy, too modern. This isn't minimalism, it's restraint, the discipline to stop when the shape is right, even if it looks incomplete to the untrained eye. That same restraint shows in how they use the hooks. You never dragged one through the sea blindly. You chose the place. You watched the tides. You read the sky. You knew when not to fish. That was as important as knowing when to throw the line. You glanced down at your feet. One wet, one dry, because of course, and notice a small carving at the base of the canoe. It's a spiral, cut deep into the wood. The koru, symbolizing new life, growth, and harmony. You wonder if it's just decoration, or maybe a quiet reminder that even fishing, especially fishing, is about balance. The waves nudge the canoe gently now, as if approving your thoughts. The old man pulls in his line, smiles slightly, and begins untying the hook. He holds it up to the sun, examining it. No cracks, nowhere, still good. He passes it to you. Keep, he says. Just that, one word. You nod, but don't say thank you. Not out loud. Instead, you hold the hook gently and whisper to it. A private promise. You'll use it wisely. And maybe, if you're lucky, you'll never need a better design. You step back onto the pebbled shore. The morning light now sharper, cutting through the last of the mist. And your hands smell like salt and fish and wood. And there's a pleasant ache in your shoulders. Behind you, the old man secures the canoe with the same quiet rhythm as before. Like this is all just another sunrise in a lifetime of sunrises. But you can't stop thinking about what you just used. That small, silent marvel hanging from your cord, wrapped wrist. It's time to dive deeper. Not into the sea, but into what those hooks were made of. The Maori didn't just grab whatever was lying around and hope for the best. They were master materialists. Each choice of hook component a calculated blend of availability, durability, and mana. You're handed a woven basket filled with old matao. Some are broken, some still sharp, some just strange. Your first discovery is obvious shell. Paiwa, shell glows with that blue. Green iridescence that feels almost unnatural, like something a special effects artist cooked up for a mermaid movie. But this was no vanity choice. Piwa wasn't just pretty, it was tough. Thin but resilient, and its shimmer added just enough flicker to the water to draw curious fish closer. In deeper waters, this mattered. No bait? No problem. Flash was bait. Next, you find bone hooks, sturdier, duller in appearance. These came from dogs, birds, and occasionally humans. Yes, actual people. When someone of status died, their bones might be fashioned into tools, including hooks. It wasn't grim, it was legacy. Imagine your grandchild feeding their family using a sliver of your femur. Weirdly touching, right? Then there's wood. Hardwoods like mare and akeek were favored for their strength and water resistance. A wooden hook might seem flimsy today, but it had its own advantages. It floated slightly, perfect for shallow fishing. Maori fishers sometimes carved them with an almost architectural precision, grooves along the shank to aid in lashing, little lips at the bend to improve grip, and then the showstoppery shark tooth. You run your thumb along one, still sharp after who knows how many centuries. These weren't common, they were prestige items, reserved for serious hunting or ceremonial use. Shark teeth had power. They were taken from apex predators, animals with their own place in Maori mythology. When you fished with one, you didn't just bait a snapper. You invoked a spirit. You noticed, too, that many hooks combine materials. One might have a wooden shank and a bone barb, lashed together with flax fiber and sealed with resin. This composite style allowed for specialization. You could make the point strong and the body light, like a Formula One car, but for seafood. Historians love to debate whether these combos were invented in Aotearoa or brought from Polynesian homelands. What's clear is that Maori took those early ideas and ran with them, adapting to their new environment. New Zealand's forests, rivers, and coasts offered raw materials not found on smaller tropical islands. More wood, more bird bone, more deep sea fish that needed extra power to catch. There's a fringe theory, rare but fascinating, that suggests some early Maori hooks were used less for catching and more for commanding. That's right. Certain matau may have been symbolic tools wielded in rituals to bless or direct fishing success. A kind of fishy wand. It's speculative, sure, but not outlandish. Maori culture weaves utility with spirituality in almost every domain. You run your fingers along a particularly unusual hook, curved too tightly, and almost ornament-like in shape. It's hard to imagine it ever snagging a fish. Maybe it wasn't supposed to. Some matau were likely meant for display only, worn around the neck, or kept in a carved box. They declared status more than they secured dinner. Owning a beautiful hook was like driving a luxury car. No one cared if it actually worked, as long as it turned heads. One quirky detail. Some old hooks have what look like tiny beards. Short tufts of dog fur or bird feathers tied just above the point. Scholars think these acted as visual lures, or maybe scent attractants. One 18th century journal even suggests a rare technique where the fisher chewed on raw mussels and spit them onto the lure. Saliva as chum. Now there's a sleep-friendly image for you. You hold up two matau side. By side one gleaming piua shell, one matte finished bone. Same shape, different soul. The shell one wants to shimmer and dance. The bone one just wants to dig in and hold on. The lines they were tied to were just as thoughtfully crafted. Made from muka, the inner fibers of the heracake flax plant. They were soaked, twisted, dried, and often smoked to improve longevity. They didn't fray easily. They didn't rot quickly. And they had a certain elasticity that helped absorb the thrash of a strong fish. As the old man shows you how to tie a proper lashing between line and hook, you notice how patient he is. Every motion is deliberate. There are no wasted steps. And when it's finished, the hook hangs just right, aligned, balanced, ready. You realize then these weren't just tools. They were collaborations. Nature provided the materials. People provided the attention. Together, they shaped something enduring. Back in the basket, you notice a broken hook. Its shank snapped cleanly, its curve still intact. You're about to put it aside when the old man gestures. Keep it. Broken matau were often buried or returned to the sea, given back with gratitude. Even in ruin, they were honored. So you tuck it into your pouch. Maybe one day, you'll return it to the waves. You sit beneath a leaning Pihuchikawa tree, the hook still resting in your hand, and the question returns like a tug on the line. Why that curve? Why inward? It's the defining trait of the Maori Matao, a curve so inward that, by modern standards, it looks like a design flaw. Most people assume a fish would slip right off. No barb, no aggressive point. It's counterintuitive, like trying to trap something by giving it a gentle hug. But once you've watched it in action, seen fish after fish snag cleanly in the mouth, you realize this is less a trap and more a trick of behavior. The curious curve inward doesn't stab, it catches. You lift the hook again and tilt it against the light. That curve isn't ornamental. It's engineered, just not in the way you'd expect. Let's walk through how it works, shall we? Fish bite from the side. They don't usually charge food head on. As they approach the lure, baited or not, they investigate. Sometimes they nibble. Sometimes they suck it in, then spit it out if it's not tasty. The Matao's inward curve allows it to slide in cleanly, rotating inside the fish's mouth. When the fish turns to swim off, bam, the hook snags neatly in the corner of the jaw. No barb needed. It stays lodged through tension and the natural torque of escape. This curve isn't forcing the issue. It's allowing it. Historians still argue whether Maori carvers knew all this consciously. Did they understand hydrodynamics, jaw anatomy? Were they sketching experiments in the sand with conclusions like fish rotate 37 degrees upon exit? Probably not. But what they did have was observation, iteration, and a tight feedback loop with nature. They noticed what worked. They copied the winners. They didn't need charts. They had generations of watching. You lie back on the grass and imagine yourself as one of those fish. You see a flash in the water, a bit of shell, just hovering. Maybe it wiggles a little. You settle up, curious. Nip. Taste. Turn. Suddenly, you're airborne, confused, offended, and very much not in the water anymore. That's the genius of the inward, pointing hook. It uses your own instinct against you. But that curve has other consequences. For one, it reduces injury. The Matao doesn't pierce deep into the throat or gut. It lands neatly in the corner of the mouth, minimizing harm. Fish that were too small or accidentally caught could be released with minimal damage. Today we call this catch and release. But the Maori were doing it long before it became a conservation buzzword. Some researchers argue the shape also allowed for stealthier strikes. Because the hook doesn't protrude sharply, fish don't spook as easily. The hook glides into place. There's no sudden jab, no metallic glint. Just a smooth, almost surgical entrance. Now here's a fringe tidbit. Some early European visitors thought these hooks were decorative. In their journals, they scoffed at the design, assuming it was made by people who didn't understand proper angling. Some even reshaped or modified the hooks and promptly caught nothing. One sailor wrote, "The native implements are inferior in appearance, but surpass our own in result." Understatement of the century. You roll onto your side and see the old man across the clearing, carving another hook from bone. The motion is almost hypnotic. Scrape, turn, test. He doesn't look at what he's doing. He just knows. His knife, curved like the hook itself, moves in sure arcs. No ruler. No compass. Just instinct. You wonder how many fish have been fooled by that exact curve. Hundreds. Thousands. A shape repeated so often it may as well be encoded into the sea bead. You pick up another example. This one has a groove inside the curve, not for decoration, but to assist in grip. Some fish have tough, rubbery mouths, and this groove helps seat the hook just a bit deeper. Clever. You feel like you're holding the 1,000-year-old ancestor of your favorite multitool. In some rare finds, the curve is exaggerated almost into a spiral. These extreme hooks may have been species-specific or even ceremonial. There's a theory that deep curves were designed for strong, jawed reef fish, which could break lesser hooks. Others argue they were symbolic, spiritual keys meant to lock the fish's spirit as well as its body. You think back to how many cultures revere spirals. The Fibonacci sequence, galaxies, nautilus shells. Maybe the hook's curve is a small echo of that same cosmic math. One Maori proverb says, "Iikakaek ai rero hirio kaunen na ai tatohu e," a fish caught from below, sunk by the tree that bore the hook. It's a reminder that even the humblest branch, shaped right, can bring in life. You start to see the curve not just as a tool, but a metaphor. How many times in life does force fail where finesse works? How often do we try to jab our way through problems when a little patience and a well-timed curve would work better? You trace the arc one last time. It feels intentional, not perfect, not symmetrical, but true. That's the power of this puzzling simplicity. It doesn't need to look impressive. It just needs to work. And it does. Again and again and again. Your waist deep in the shallows now. Cool water lapping around your knees as the canoe rocks gently behind you. The old man isn't fishing anymore. He's sorting through a bundle of strange, shimmering things that don't look like hooks at all, more like sea creatures. Ghostly, jellyfish, like lures made from shell, bone, and feather. These are the Maori's invisible bait. That's not poetic exaggeration. Some of these hooks were used without bait at all. Instead, they relied on illusion, optical tricks, flashes of color, movement. To your modern brain, trained on worms, dough balls, or lurid pink rubber lures, it sounds ridiculous. A baitless hook. That's like bringing a spoon to a sword fight, but you watch as the old man ties one of these shimmer hooks onto a flax line and tosses it gently into the water. It glides downward, its shell face catching sunlight in quick flickers. The feathers pulse. The fish nearby, the ones you can barely see, notice instantly. They hover. Approach. Nudge. He doesn't pull. He lets it dance. One strikes. And just like that, it's hooked. No bait. Just design. The trick lies in what the hook mimics. Some resemble small fish, others invertebrates. Many are carved or adorned to catch light in quick bursts. What scientists today call specular reflection. Fish love shimmer. It signals life, movement, something tasty to chase. The Maori didn't have that term, of course, but they understood the behavior. One brilliant example is the use of piawa shell, not just for the hook itself, but as part of the lure. A wide, curved piece acts like a mini mirror. As it spins or bobs, it creates flash patterns underwater. You can't see them from the surface, but the fish do. And they come. Some lures are even weirder. Thin slats of wood attached perpendicular to the line, causing it to spin as it sinks. This creates a whirling illusion, almost like a wounded fish darting downward. No smell, no flavor. Just visual chaos that screams, easy meal! To anything with gills. There's a fringe theory, half folklore, half field note, that certain hooks were designed to imitate the movement of sea spirits or tipua, ethereal creatures that dance just below the surface. The idea was that fish, drawn to the energy of these beings, would bite without thinking. Even if you're skeptical, it's clear that these hooks were designed to trigger curiosity, not just hunger. You crouch beside the old man as he holds up a particularly elaborate matau. The shank is wrapped in dog fur, dyed red with clay. A small feather plume flutters at the top. It's a fishing tool, yes, but also kind of fabulous. You wouldn't be surprised to see it in a fashion show. Some of these hooks were so beautiful that they blur the line between lure and art. In fact, it's believed that a few weren't even used for fishing, but worn or displayed as a way of attracting, not fish, but mana. Prestige. The more catching your gear, the more respect you commanded among your peers. You try casting one of the shimmer hooks. Not far, just enough to watch its movement. It spins lazily at first, then catches a current and begins to oscillate side to side. If you were a fish, you'd bite it. No question. Historians still argue whether the Maori truly understood the underwater optics at play here, or if it was just a lucky overlap of material and motion. Did they know why shimmer worked? Or did they just notice that this one caught more fish? Either way, the result is the same: a silent, beautiful decoy that works without smell, taste, or flesh. And yet, these hooks didn't replace baited ones entirely. The two systems coexisted, lures for some fish, bait for others. It depended on the species, the location, the season. Maori fishers knew when to use each. You don't bring a fake jellyfish to a flounder fight. You pick up another odd lure. It looks like a small spoon, shaped from bone, and painted with ochre. It's meant to flick sideways, as it falls, flashing briefly. It reminds you of modern spoon lures, and for good reason. They work on the same principles. Centuries before metal spoons and treble hooks hit the market, the Maori were already finessing the design with natural materials and no industrial help. Some lures even had sound. You're shown one with a small shell bead tied just above the hook. It clicks faintly in motion. Probably not enough to spook a fish, but just enough to make it curious. It's like knocking politely on a fish's front door and hoping it's in the mood for company. You glance at the bottom of the canoe where several of these decoys lie drying in the sun. No bait, no blood, just quiet, crafted deception. And that's when you realize these aren't really fishing tools. They're performances. Every cast is a scene. Every lure, a character. The fish isn't tricked, it's invited into a story. One with a surprise ending, sure, but still, you look back at your own shimmering lure, now hanging from your wrist. It glints, just slightly, in the light. You think about how much trust these tools required. Not just in the hook, but in your ability to read the sea, to know what the fish wanted. And tonight, maybe you'll dream about shimmering spirits, spinning lights, and a hook so clever, it doesn't even need food to catch you. The sky deepens as afternoon begins its slow fade. The sun, now dipping toward the western hills, casts a golden sheen over the water. You're standing at the edge of a much larger canoe now. Waka Harua, the double, holds seagoing marvel of Maori navigation. It dwarfs the smaller fishing craft you started in. With its raised decks and tall lashings, it feels more like a floating village than a simple boat. This isn't just about line fishing anymore. You're stepping into the world of men who fished the horizon. Maori seafarers who paddled and sailed well beyond the sight of land, chasing fish schools, seasonal migrations, and even spiritual visions that shimmered just beyond the ocean's lip. You climb aboard and feel the give of the woven floor beneath your feet. Bundles of flax rope line the sides. Tied off nets hang like hammocks. Cradling carved floats made from dried gourd. The whole waka creaks and sighs in the wind, like it's alive, like it's listening. The old man is here again, nodding at your presence. But this time he's not leading you. He's watching. You're to observe. Offshore fishing isn't a casual act. It's a ritual, a team effort, a commitment. You don't sail to the deep lightly. This canoe, like others before it, may travel dozens of kilometers in a single trip, and it's built to handle it. With double hulls for stability, a sail rigged from woven flax mats, and storage for days of food, fresh water, and yes, hooks. Lots of hooks. The offshore strategy differs from the inshore craft you practiced with. Here, it's not about trickery. It's about timing. The deeper ocean isn't fooled by sparkle and spin. Out here, they use long lines, multiple hooks, and heavier gear. Sometimes even stone sinkers shaped like teardrops, their cords hand, braided for strength and flexibility. One hook gets lowered. Carefully, almost reverently. Then another. 10 in total. Each with a different curve, a different lash, and sometimes a different prayer murmured under breath. One fact you hadn't thought about until now: fishing offshore was also a social contract. Maori law, or takanga, governed who could fish where, when, and with what. Some areas were tapu, sacred, restricted, off limits. Others were communal but came with obligations. Fish too much, take too greedily, and you risked not just empty nets but community rebuke. This waka, however, is heading to permitted grounds. Grounds known for large pelagic fish, albacore, kingfish, maybe even the elusive apuku. deep water dwellers that could pull a grown man into the sea if he wasn't paying attention. As the sails catch wind and the canoe begins its glide, you feel the shift. It's not just the distance from shore, it's the silence. Out here, everything hums different. No birds, no trees. Just the hiss of water parting and the occasional slap of a wave against hull. There's something eerie about it, but also thrilling. You kneel near one of the fishers as he begins to prep another line. This one's unusual. Twined from both muka flax and sinew, probably from a dog or seal. It's old, possibly ancestral. You notice it has a carved bone toggle near the hook. Not functional, but symbolic. A family mark, perhaps, or a blessing. Then, a ripple across the water's surface. The men stir. Fish, a school moves below, unseen but sensed. Maybe it's the current, the way the surface dimples. Or maybe it's just experience. Something in the air, like electricity before lightning. The lines are dropped, not flung. Each hook sinks, and you realize this isn't combat fishing. This is listening. The fish come to you, drawn by the movement, the shimmer, the soft, clean fall of the hook into the sea's mouth. One line twitches. Another jerks hard. Suddenly, the waka erupts into movement. One man hauls a line, coiling it like a snake. Another steadies the gunnel. You help, or at least try, grabbing the back end of the rope as it thrashes in your hands. The pull is incredible, like holding onto a subway car through a loop. And then, a flash. A huge, glistening kingfish breaches the surface. It flails, turns, and catches itself even tighter on the inward curve of a shell hook, no bigger than your thumb. You stare at it, stunned. They land it together, gently. No shouting, no fist pumping. Just nods, quick motions, efficient dispatch. The fish is wrapped in flax, its tail bound. Nothing is wasted. The moment the catch is secure, another line twitches. This one doesn't yield so easily. The fish pulls away, testing the line. The man holding it lowers his hands, lets it go a little, then yanks sharply. The hook sets. This dance goes on for an hour, pulling, waiting, coiling. Hooks that would look ornamental to a modern angler pull in meals large enough to feed a village. No tangled lines, no breakages, just harmony. Precision, faith in form. You glance down into the water, half expecting to see one of the hooks mid-action. But the ocean keeps its secrets. All you see is your reflection, salt-streaked, wide-eyed, thoroughly converted. You realize you're not just witnessing fishing. You're witnessing philosophy. These men don't command the sea. They partner with it. They don't use force, they use understanding and the hook. This small, curved whisper of bone or shell is the medium. As the canoe turns back toward land, the sail snapping lightly above you, you feel it, the exhaustion in your limbs, the salt tightening on your skin, and a quiet wonder growing behind your ribs. You've fished the horizon now, and it's fished you right back. Back on shore, the stars begin to pierce the indigo sky one by one, like glowing pinholes in a blanket. You're lying on a woven mat, muscle sore, skin slightly sunburned, and your mind still tethered to the open water. The day's catches are wrapped and stored. The waka rests, quiet, but out there, just beyond the headland, you can feel it. A presence, not human, not fish, something older. You aren't alone. At least, not according to Maori tradition. The ocean isn't just a resource. It's alive. Te Moana, Nuaie Kiwa, the great ocean of Kiwa, is populated not only by fish and currents, but by beings of power and mystery. Tonight, the stories bubble up around the fire. Someone's uncle begins talking in a slow, deep voice, the kind that makes shadows flicker taller on the rocks. Taniwa, you've heard the name before. Maori sea guardians or monsters, depending on who's telling it. Sometimes they appear as giant reptiles. Other times as whales, or even as shapeshifters who dwell in deep underwater caves and emerge to warn, punish, or protect. Historians still argue whether Taniwa were purely symbolic or grounded in sightings of real creatures. Giant eels, unknown sea mammals, or misidentified whales. Some skeptics point to natural phenomena like whirlpools, rogue waves, or floating logs that seem to move with intention. But the Maori don't argue. The Taniwa are there. Full stop. You feel it now. The same chill you felt when the canoe glided out of sight of land. That sense of being watched, not with menace, but with scrutiny. If you are respectful, they let you pass. If not, well, there are stories. You hear one tonight. About a village that overfished a sacred bay. The fish vanished for a generation. When the elders performed a ritual apology, they claim a Taniwa rose from the depths, its eyes glowing, its back marked with coral, and nodded before vanishing. A week later, the fish returned. You try not to shiver. Hooks, of course, were part of this relationship with the unseen. Certain matau were considered tapu, sacred, and used only during ceremonies. Others were blessed before long voyages. Some were marked with carvings specific to the local Taniwa, almost like a license to fish in their territory. One quirky tidbit: some waka were known to feed their hooks. Fishers would toss a portion of bait, or even a tiny carved figure into the sea before the first cast. Not as an offering to Tangaroa, the sea god, that was separate. This was specifically for the Taniwa. A bribe? A courtesy. You lie back and look at the stars. The Southern Cross is rising. Above you, the Milky Way streaks across the sky like a trail of spilled flour. You wonder how many fishers sat right here, hundreds of years ago, watching the same sky, and wondering if the splash they just heard was a Taniwa surfacing. The older man at the fire sees you looking nervously toward the sea. "Don't fear," he says quietly. They know you now. You want to believe him. Partly because it's comforting. Partly because, deep down, something has changed since you first picked up that hook. You're not just a visitor anymore. You've touched the cord. Felt the pull. Heard the whisper of bone against tide. And yet, there's still the mystery. You remember a story from earlier in the day? Told almost offhand, a giant fish, hooked with a matau so strong it bent, but didn't break. The fisher was pulled across the sea for hours. When he finally cut the line, the hook returned alone, clean, untangled, as if the ocean had politely declined the invitation. Was it a metaphor? A warning? A truth? Historians love to label these stories as myth, but Maori oral tradition doesn't draw that line so strictly. If enough people believe in something, honor it, fear it, plan around it, doesn't it become real in all the ways that matter? You reach into your pouch and touch your own hook, the one you caught your first fish with. It's still smooth, still cool, but in the firelight, it seems to gleam more than it should. You wonder, what if it has already been claimed? What if out there, a Taniwa has taken notice? You shake the thought off, but not completely. Instead, you listen to the fire crackle, the soft murmur of stories, the wind rolling in from the surf, the scent of fish oil, salt, and smoke wrapping you like a spell. Tomorrow, you'll fish again. You'll carry that hook with the same care you give a sacred object, because maybe it is, maybe all of them are, and maybe, just maybe, you're not fishing despite the monsters beneath. You're fishing with them. The morning comes softer this time. The sea, unusually still, reflects the clouds like sheets of polished obsidian. You're walking a rocky path above a quiet cove, your hands wrapped around a bundle of old hooks. Some that you've used, others given to you as tokens, maybe tests. But one, in particular, is different. It's been handed down, not just from one hand to another, but from one generation to the next. This is a heirloom matau. Unlike the others, this one isn't shaped for today's tide. It's not optimized for snapper or kingfish. It's not sharp anymore. The lashings are faded, the shell cracked slightly along its curve. But still, no one dares repair it. To do so would be like repainting an ancestor's face. It's not just old, it's revered. You crouch at a high perch, looking down at the cove, and hold the hook to the light. Carvings you hadn't noticed before catch your eye. Minute spiral grooves along the inner shank, almost too small to be decorative. Were they meant to symbolize something? A family line? A tribute to the sea? Historians still argue whether carved hooks like this were practical tools used by skilled fishers or purely ceremonial, artifacts never intended to touch water again. Some were clearly used. Others show no wear, no salt scaring, no signs of ever holding line. But the ambiguity makes them no less powerful. You run your thumb along the etched edge. It's warm now, from your grip, or maybe from something deeper. The man who gave it to you. He didn't say, "This is yours," he said. "Hold this for a while." The implication was clear. This matao belongs to time, not people. You're just the current keeper. One quirky tale swirls around a matao much, like this one, a legendary hook, said to bring fish only on Tuesdays, and only if its keeper had eaten no cooked food that morning. Seems absurd. But the story persisted across 3 generations. Whether magic or metabolism, no one dared break the tradition. You think about that, how a tool can be so wrapped in memory, in rule, in myth, that it becomes something other than a tool. It becomes a vessel. A knot of history coiled tight. Some matao were named, like ships or weapons, not always allowed. Names could be sacred, whispered only in ritual. A hook passed from grandfather to grandson might carry more than just lineage. It might carry burden, expectation, even prophecy. You lift the hook again. Something about its weight feels uneven. You tilt it. There, in the grain of the shell, is a notch that doesn't belong. Not a carving. A chip. A flaw. Perhaps from a struggle long ago. Maybe it caught something too big, too wild, and the shank bit back. You wonder. What kind of fish leaves a mark on the hook? These heirloom matao weren't left lying around. They were stored in woven satchels, hidden in hollowed-out logs, passed only to those deemed responsible. Not necessarily the best fishers, but the most respectful ones. A matao might hang over the sleeping mat of its keeper, or be wrapped in feathers and buried near a threshold to guard the home. In some cases, a family would carve matching pendants, hei matao, worn around the neck, echoing the shape of their ancestral hook. These weren't just jewelry. They were miniature declarations. I come from fishers. From stewards of the sea. You feel the breeze pick up? Gently. Below, waves begin their steady hush against the rocks again. The silence between you and the hook now feels loaded. Like it knows more than it lets on. You remember a moment from earlier in the trip. The old man had paused while you reeled in a particularly feisty catch. He had looked at your line, then at the hook, then at you, and said, "That one's not yours yet." You'd laughed, not understanding. But now you do. You don't own a matao like this. You earn it. Slowly. Sometimes, a hook would be buried with its keeper, especially if that person had no chosen heir. Other times, it was cast into the sea at the end of a life, the line tied to a stone, the whole rig offered back to Tangaroa. There's poetry in that. You spend your life coaxing food from the water, and in the end, you return your greatest tool as payment. You stand, stretching, and wrap the hook again. Carefully. The hill behind you is dotted with small stone markers. Old fishing camps, perhaps. A quiet grave. A memory. You wonder how many matao lie underfoot, never found. Still waiting to rustle stories into the tide. As you head back toward the village, the sun finally spills over the hills, painting everything in gold. You walk slower now. More mindful. The weight of the hook at your side no longer feels like gear. It feels like company. You're back on the beach, the sky glowing with a milky haze, and the tide inching forward like it's eavesdropping. In the distance, a small group of European sailors squats awkwardly near their longboat, scratching their heads as they watch a Maori fisherman haul in fish after fish. Calm, rhythmic, successful. The year? Somewhere in the early 1800s. The scene? Equal parts cultural curiosity and humble pie. You're watching the exact moment when the so-called sophisticated newcomers tried to outfish the locals and failed spectacularly. The sailors brought metal hooks, intricate lures, and lines made of imported rope. Their tackle boxes overflowed with brass and bait. Their strategy? Cast wide, reel fast, and assume dominance. It didn't go well. The Maori, by contrast, stood knee deep with nothing more than a simple flax cord, a shell matao, and, let's be honest, a quiet smirk. 1 cast, 2 casts, 3 fish. The sailors, still tangled in their own lines. You step closer, the hook from earlier still in your palm. The contrast is almost comedic. Here were people fresh off ships that circumnavigated the globe, brimming with enlightenment, era certainty, and they couldn't catch dinner. Historians still argue whether these early failures were due to technical flaws. Metal hooks too shiny, lines too visible, bait too foreign, or whether it was just a brutal lesson in local knowledge. The sea around Aotearoa wasn't generic. It had its own logic, and the Maori understood that logic like an old friend. One journal from a 19th century British whaler admits it plainly. The natives employ a most barbarous and crude method, yet always return with heavier nets. Oaf. That's the sound of pride deflating like a pop bladder. What the Europeans didn't grasp was that Maori fishing wasn't just about catching. It was about knowing. Tides, temperatures, moon cycles, fish behavior, spiritual readiness, hook design. Each one tuned like a string on an instrument. You don't just pluck a note and hope. You play. One quirky record from the Bay of Islands mentions a frustrated English captain who traded half a crate of rum for a magic hook he believed was blessed by some local god. He took it offshore, tied it to his gear, and promptly lost it overboard. Whether the sea claimed it for real, or just didn't want his vibes, we'll never know. You walk past where the old waka is being repaired, planks being lashed, hooks being oiled. A young boy is polishing a wooden shank with sharkskin. Nearby, a European trader watches from behind a crate, eyes squinting at the design. You can almost see the gears turning. Why does that curve inward? What's with the feather? Why no barb? You imagine him returning to England with sketches and stories, telling people of primitive fishers whose odd tools inexplicably outperformed anything modern science could design. His colleagues would laugh. They'd publish a short note in a maritime journal, then quietly start copying the design. In fact, they did. Elements of the Maori hook, particularly the inward curve, began creeping into global fishing lore. Sometimes without credit, they called them circle hooks or rotating shanks. Same physics, same results, but they rarely mentioned the centuries-old expertise behind it. This wasn't just theft of design, it was dismissal of context. The hook worked because of how it was used. Not yanked like a crankbait, but allowed to settle, to turn, to invite the fish. Without understanding that relationship, the shape alone was just a guess. You kneel at the edge of the water and dip the hook into a shallow pool. It shimmers briefly. Still perfect, still catching stories more easily than fish. Back then, some Europeans couldn't believe such effective tools came from unschooled people. But others, those who paid attention, realized quickly that Maori knowledge systems weren't lacking sophistication. They simply expressed it differently. Not in blueprints, but in practice. Not in books, but in memory. Not in patents, but in precision. You turn the hook over again and wonder, how many sailors went home humbled? How many quietly carved their own version of this tool? How many fish were caught thanks to a shape they didn't invent but learned? If they were lucky, to respect. There's a phrase the old man shared earlier. Me mo tau ki te moana, me mo tau ki te wenua. Know the sea, and know the land. It's not a slogan, it's a survival guide. One that, in the end, outperformed anything in a European tackle catalog. You stand, shake the salt from your hands, and glance once more at the longboat in the distance. The sailors are packing up now, gear still dry, lines still tangled. One of them, red-faced and sunburnt, glances at you, then at the Maori fishers hauling a glistening net ashore. His expression says it all. Next time, he's bringing less gear. And maybe asking a few more questions. You find yourself inside a small warenui, the community meeting house, where carved beams and woven panels rise around you, like the ribs of some sacred beast. The air is warm with the scent of polished wood and flax, and in the center, resting atop a woven mat, is a hook so exquisite it nearly glows. This is not a fishing tool. This is a matao for gods and chiefs. It's larger than most, maybe the size of your palm, but more intricate. The curve is sharper, almost stylized. The lashing is done with crimson, dyed flax, knotted in a pattern you've never seen before. The shank is carved with swirling motifs that ripple like waves, and at the base sits an inset of piwo shell finely placed. It looks poured in. No line has ever touched this hook. No fish ever will. That's not its purpose. You lean closer and feel it before you touch it. The hum of mana. That layered spiritual presence the Maori speak of, built through legacy, honor, purpose. Some hooks were designed not for the ocean, but for the ancestors. Carved as offerings, worn during rituals, presented at ceremonies, they were a kind of spoken word in physical form. One elder notices your gaze. He nods and begins to speak, not loudly, not for drama, but with that quiet voice that holds more weight than volume. This one belonged to a chief. Never fished with, worn only in time of negotiation. You blink. Negotiation. You thought hooks were for food, maybe war. But politics? It makes sense, though. Fishing was power. A man who fed many wielded influence. A man who chose not to fish with such a tool, who reserved it as a symbol, was showing restraint, wealth, and purpose. Historians still argue whether such hooks were worn primarily for status, or if they held deeper functions, like channeling spiritual protection or signaling tribal affiliations. The line between display and invocation was thin. These hooks weren't just ornaments. They were declarations. One quirky detail, some ceremonial matao were deliberately blunted. They weren't meant to work in water, but instead to show refinement. A chief didn't need to fish with a deadly tool. He had others for that. This was about legacy, about the shape as symbol. You're shown another older piece. This one is even stranger. The curve is exaggerated, almost comical in its spiral. You wonder if it ever had a practical purpose, but the elder explains. It's a teaching hook. For stories. For children. See the shape? It tells them to respect what feeds them. You turn the hook gently in your hands. Even now, you feel the lessons baked into the grain. Not through explanation. Just presence. These sacred hooks lived quiet lives. They were stored in carved boxes, wakahuia, and opened only on special occasions. Some were passed between tribes during peace talks, as gifts more powerful than words. Others were offered at burial mounds, left behind to accompany great leaders into the next world. You picture one of those chiefs now, cloaked in dogskin, the matao hung from a cord of flax, swaying lightly as he walks. Maybe it glints in the sunlight. Maybe it tells everyone watching, this man commands the sea, not just with tools, but with understanding. Back in the Waranui, you're handed a replica, made for learning. The craftsmanship is still high, but it lacks that old gravity. Still, holding it feels ceremonial, like you've stepped into a role, even temporarily. One ritual involved blessing such hooks with wei tapu, sacred water infused with herbs and chants. The carver might fast for days before starting. The recipient, too, might undergo ritual cleansing, because to wear the hook was to carry history. You glance up at the carved rafters, where stylized fish swim among the patterns. The hook in your hand now feels like the punctuation mark at the end of their stories. What's fascinating is how this practice persisted even after European contact. While many functional matao began to be replaced with metal alternatives, ceremonial hooks flourished. They became diplomatic tools, traded, gifted, preserved in museums. Some were recast in greenstone. Others were miniaturized independents, haimatao, worn close to the heart. You might even have seen one yourself without knowing it. But here, in this Waranui, there's no confusion. These are not souvenirs. These are embodied relationships between people, the ocean, the divine. You hear the wind rise outside, rattling the flax mats. For a moment, the hook flickers in your grip, the shell catching light. It almost seems to pulse. You blink, shake your head. The elder smiles. They remember, he says simply, and you believe him. You're standing at the edge of a sleek laboratory now. Glass walls, polished floors, and the subtle whir of climate control. It's a far cry from the flax, scented Warenui, or the rolling deck of a waka. And yet, in the middle of a sterile test tank, floating gently on a synthetic current, is a familiar shape, a replica Maori hook. Across from you, a marine biologist frowns at her data. The graph on her screen dips where it should climb. She mutters something about control groups and replicability. You lean in. The experiment. Simple in theory, baffling in result. Compare the efficiency of traditional Maori matau against modern stainless steel circle hooks using the same bait, line, and conditions. Spoiler alert, the matau wins. Again. Unreal, she says. They're not even barbed. How? You suppress a smirk. You know how. You've seen how. And now, modern science is catching up. This isn't the first test of its kind. Over the past 2 decades, researchers have run controlled trials using various traditional Pacific Island hook designs, including the distinctive inward, curving Maori style. Time and again, the matau outperforms its contemporary counterparts in terms of jaw hook rate, minimal injury, and fish retention. Historians still argue whether the original designs were optimized in a scientific sense, but biologists now confirm what Maori knew for centuries, that a fish, once snagged in the corner of the mouth by a properly curved matau, is less likely to thrash free or suffer deep injury. And that translates to both effectiveness and sustainability. You glance at a nearby 3D printer. It's churning out yet another test version, based on a digital scan of an ancient hook from a museum in Rotorua. Same dimensions, same curve, but made from polymer resin. Clinical, odorless. Clean, you pick it up. It feels wrong. Not because it's poorly made, but because it has no story. No fingerprints. Just a shape. Nearby, a technician checks a box of metal prototypes. They've tried everything. Titanium anodized aluminum, barbless circles with spring-loaded mechanisms. None of them match the simplicity and reliability of the shell matau. You chuckle. Somewhere, a long dead tahunga must be grinning from beneath the waves. One quirky case study came from a marine reserve near the Chatham Islands, where a team of conservationists tried using traditional style hooks to catch tagged fish with minimal stress. The results: remarkably high survival rates upon release. The curve, once scoffed at by colonial captains, had become a modern tool of ethical angling. You can't help but marvel. The same shape that once dangled from a flax cord in a dugout canoe is now influencing sustainable fishing regulations. It's a comeback story with no chest pounding, just quiet vindication. There's even a movement now, a blend of science and indigenous knowledge called Mautaranga Amai, Ori, that insists we stop treating traditional tools as quaint curios and start seeing them as valid engineering systems, not artifacts, solutions. And the matau is Exhibit A. One marine ecologist even wrote a paper titled Designed by Ancestor, in which she argues that centuries of Maori hook making followed the same iterative process as modern R&D. Observe, adjust, test, repeat. No lab coats needed, just time, humility, and a working relationship with the ocean. You look around at the polished lab, the tanks, the spreadsheets. It's all impressive. But you remember standing barefoot in a canoe, line in hand, hook sinking silently into the deep. No tech. No data sets. Just wind, instinct, and curve. You ask the biologist what's next. She shrugs. We'll probably patent a version, she says. Market it to conservation anglers. Maybe even recreational fishers. And you nod. Because yes, it's good that the hook's principles are being recognized, that the knowledge isn't being lost. But you hope, somewhere in that patent, someone includes a footnote inspired by matau Maori, the hook that needed no improvement. You reach into your pocket and pull out your own hook. Not one from the lab. The real one. Worn smooth. Slightly chipped. Perfect. You hold it up to the light. Same curve. Same truth. Sometimes, the best design isn't the most advanced. It's just the most listened to. You're traveling now, not through time, but across islands. The sun rises over another Pacific shore, and you feel the air shift warmer, denser, more fragrant with coconut and salt. You're no longer in Aotearoa, you're in the Marquesas, or maybe it's Rarotonga, or Samoa. You've followed the hook's trail outward, across the same sea that once linked Polynesia like a beaded necklace. And it turns out, the Matau wasn't alone. Across the Pacific, you start to notice echoes, curved hooks made from bone, shell, wood. Some eerily similar to the Maori design, others with their own flair, barbs carved into the shank, double hooks lashed at odd angles, decorative feathers tied just so. Trade routes and tangled lines. The sea as the great highway. You realize quickly the simplicity of Maori hooks wasn't an isolated miracle. It was part of a sprawling network of innovation, influence, and oceanic memory. Historians still argue who borrowed from whom. Did the Maori inherit their hook style from Tahitian ancestors? Did Hawaiian fishers independently develop similar inward-pointing matau? Or did knowledge drift like a canoe, spreading from one archipelago to the next, reshaped slightly at each stop? The evidence is watery. Archaeologists have uncovered hooks in Fiji that date back over 3,000 years, some bearing strong resemblance to the curved forms found later in Aotearoa. In the Cook Islands, museum collections house matau, with the same unbarbed inward sweep. And in Hawaii, fishers still use a version of the makau, so close in function and form that you could mistake it for a cousin of your own. One quirky find comes from an old excavation on Opalu, in Samoa, a triple hook rig, strung with coconut husk twine and capped with boar tusk. It was likely used to snag large reef fish, but no one really knows. It could also have been ceremonial, or even a joke among fishermen. Still, its presence adds to the puzzle. You sit on a low stone wall in Tonga, turning your own matau over in your hand. Around you, fishermen repair nets, kids chase chickens, and an elder ties knots with one hand while sipping from a cracked enamel mug. You ask him if he's seen hooks like yours. He nods slowly. Same story, he says. Different island. You begin to understand. Each hook is both local and universal. The Pacific Ocean, vast as it is, has always been a place of sharing, not isolation. Language roots tie these islands together. So do song, story, and fishing. You visit museums in Nuku'alofa, Papeete, Apia. Each holds a drawer or cabinet of hooks. Some preserved perfectly, some corroded by salt, time, neglect. But all of them whisper the same message. We learn from the sea, and the sea, apparently, doesn't mind repeating itself. Modern scholars have tried mapping the lineage of hook designs, tracing curves like family trees. But the deeper they dig, the murkier it becomes. One design might pop up in two places, separated by 1,000 kilometers. Convergent evolution. Shared ancestry. Coincidence. It's hard to say. You think of it like a giant fishing line, tangled across oceans, looping back, splitting off, then reconnecting. Sometimes with knots, sometimes with clean stretches. But always moving forward. You wonder how many travelers carried matau across the sea, wrapped in cloth, hidden in canoe storage, not just as tools, but as talismans, pieces of home that could feed you, guide you, and link you back to the people you'd left behind. One traveling story comes from a navigator who set out from Hiva'o and landed in what is now the Tuamotus. He brought with him only a small stone adze, a calabash of fresh water, and 2 carved hooks. He traded one, kept the other. Both survived, and their descendants, oral and otherwise, still talk about those hooks today. You look out at the horizon and picture it. A thin outrigger canoe slicing through swells, the wind pushing a mat sail, a hook tied to the stern, swaying slightly with each crest. It's a powerful image, not just of migration, but of continuity. The idea that a design could move without needing marketing, that its brilliance was so obvious, it sold itself through survival. You're reminded of something the old fisherman in Aotearoa said. This shape, it's not ours. We just listened. maybe that's the answer. Maybe these islands weren't passing down inventions. Maybe they were passing down permissions. A gentle nudge that said, "This is the way the ocean prefers to be asked." You grip your hook a little tighter. The curve feels familiar now. Not just in your hand, but in your heart. Like you've followed it far enough to understand that it doesn't belong to any one island, any one people. It belongs to the ocean. And the ocean loves to share. The tide has crept in again, licking at your ankles as you return to the same quiet cove where it all began. The moon is full this time, casting a soft, silvery path across the water like an invitation back to sea. But you're not going anywhere now. Not tonight. You sit in the sand, the hook resting beside you, not lashed to a line, not hidden in a pouch, just there. Still, as if it's watching the ocean with you. Listening, you trace the curve one last time. It's smooth, familiar, somehow softer than before. You remember the flash of the first fish, the rhythm of the paddles, the shimmer of baitless lures, the hum of stories shared by firelight. All of it wrapped up in this impossibly quiet, impossibly effective little shape. And here's the thing. It still doesn't make sense. How something so small, so simple, no barb, no bait, no steel, could work better than anything designed in a lab. How a tool that defies modern logic continues to outfish the ones that try to improve it. Historians still argue whether the Matau's magic lies in its shape, or in the world it came from, a world that saw no need to separate the practical from the spiritual. A world where hooks were not just tools, but testaments. You lift the hook to the moonlight. It glints once, just enough. You remember the hooks that never touch water, too sacred. The ones carved for children, to teach, to warn, to bless. The ones traded, buried, whispered over. The ones found in far-off islands, carried on currents of salt and song. You remember the fish that hooked themselves, the ones that got away, and the ones that didn't. And you wonder how many more are still out there. Not just in sea or museum, but tucked into rafters, wrapped in cloth, hanging from necks. Not retired, just resting. Waiting. You stretch out on the sand, one arm draped over your stomach, the other gently curled around the hook. The waves hush against the rocks in that same old rhythm. And as the stars wheel overhead, you think, not about what the hook catches, but what it connects. The hand to the sea, the past to the present, the simple to the sacred. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to shine. It just needs to curve, sauciently, like the moon pulling the tide. Because sometimes, the truest genius is the one that whispers and waits. The waves are quieter now, and the wind has settled into a slow, steady breath across the land. The sky, full of stars, leans gently over you like a tired grandparent tucking you in. That little hook, nestled in your hand, feels less like a tool and more like a promise of continuity, of care, of craft that knows when to stop. You feel your muscles loosen, your thoughts uncoil. The fire stories drift off into memory, the laughter fades, and the sea just keeps being the sea. Eternal. Rhythmic. Patient. You remember the fishers you met, the ones who carved without rulers, tied knots by feel, and cast their hopes into the blue without ever needing a sonar. They knew. Not everything, but enough. You close your eyes and listen to the tide lap gently at the shore, a lullaby in saltwater syllables. In your dreams, the Matau glides again, not to catch, but to float quietly. Steadily, curving always toward the heart. You're safe now, and you've brought something sacred back with you. Sleep well.